Welcome back to Sailing El Jaleo! After spending a day busting our hump at a marina in North Myrtle Beach, it was time to start heading south again in search of the ever-elusive warmer weather. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. As we left North Myrtle Beach and continued on through Myrtle Beach, we were treated to a whole host of fancy homes all along the ICW. And there were some that I would have to guess were in the millions and millions of dollars. I think most of the homes probably through that area were. And I'm not much of a big city person. I did grow up in a very small town. That's what I prefer. And I spent a lot of time in Colorado in like medium-sized towns or cities, and those were fine, but I much prefer rural areas. I like the natural beauty. And when I had to drive to work in Colorado, I could have taken the freeway and got there in 20 minutes, but I always went through the back roads in the little bit of farm country there was. I mean, there's a lot of farm country there, but to find back roads, like from Longmont to Greeley, there was really only one path. And I always took the most rural path I could because I just like the scenery, you know. I like being in nature and enjoying that. So I ended up taking me twice as long to get to work, but that's okay. And all along here there were some really expensive homes, and I can appreciate that. But at the same time, you know, I live in a very small home and it's 35 feet, and I love everything about this boat, everything that Frank did to it, everything that I've done to it since, the design. I just absolutely adore this boat. And originally there were going to be 2 other people traveling with me, and 35 feet, I think, which is what El Jaleo is, I think would be perfect for 2 or 3 people. But for 1 person and 3 dogs, if anything, this home is almost too big. You know, having a small house that you essentially live in and move in has really simplified life, and I just love it. You know, I've got some books and stuff. It's just a very utilitarian existence. I've got enough room for a couple of pieces of art and, you know, some personal stuff, obviously, but I love it. And if I ever were to move back to land, I probably would have a very small home. I just love the simple living. And if I had known it was just going to be me and 3 dogs, I could easily have I would never not want this boat. It's beautiful, it's perfect, I love it. But if I were to know what I know now, you know, when I first started looking at boats, I thought, oh, I want a 60-foot boat, you know, and it's like, that is just obscene thinking about now. I mean, I can't even keep up with the maintenance on this boat, let alone on a 60-foot boat. If I were to start over again, honestly, as much as I love this boat, I would probably look for a 28 to 30 foot boat. I could easily hack 6 feet, and sorry, Anwi's scratching behind me, so she's making some noise. But I could easily hack 6 feet right out of the center of this boat, glue the 2 ends together, and be perfectly happy. And yeah, this is almost too big. It's kind of crazy when you whittle things down. What you end up needing or liking and stuff. So yeah, but anyway, the architecture all along this region, very expensive, very impressive. I would have to say, when it comes to architecture, there are very few houses that actually catch my eye, like, oh, that's a really good looking house. I'm more of the Howard Rourke type modern architecture, or who's a real person, Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, someone like that, someone that clean, utilitarian, nice, sharp, concise lines. I just like that kind of structure. So every now and again you see a few, and maybe once we get to South Florida there will be some more modern architecture. But yeah, it's been enjoyable. So after we got through North Myrtle Beach and Myrtle Beach, we did head inland a little bit, and we came across just this huge cypress. I think they're bald cypress trees. It's kind of hard to tell because it is winter time when I got there, so they had already dropped. But I believe they're bald cypress trees, and I would love to come back through here in the summertime to check it out, because it was such beautiful, beautiful. It's kind of like what you'd think of mangroves. The trees are right up next to the water, and they had all their knobby knees along the water line, kind of like mangrove trees do. And it's just beautiful, and it was very rural, narrow channels, very deep water. It was wonderful. After spending time in all the houses, it was nice to go inland a few miles and get into that big forested area. Dang, and I just realized I have a real tendency to get off track and just gab, so apologies for that. So it was nice when we got off the beaten path, and we did run across this huge, I believe they're bald cypress trees, in this huge bald cypress forest. I was a little surprised. I always thought that cypress trees were conifers, but they're actually deciduous trees. Even though they have needle type, they call them leaves, they do actually drop their leaves in the fall. I guess if you get far enough south, they do retain their leaves, but this far north, they do drop their leaves, which are essentially needles, and they are deciduous trees, which was pretty shocking. So we did go a little bit off of the main channel, and there's a loop cut through, and we decided to anchor for the night there. This anchorage had good reviews. It was very deep. I think we anchored in like 23 to 25 feet of water, and the channel was not very wide. It was maybe 160 feet wide, and I wanted to put out more chain than 80 feet just because of how deep it was. So I was worried about when the tide shifted that we would swing into the shore. But a lot of the reviews that had been left for that anchorage, they were all glowing, and they seemed like similar-minded people that just loved being out in the middle of nowhere. And when the tides shift, they had reported that their boat actually stayed in the middle of the channel and just moved back and forth. There wasn't wide swings. So I was hoping that was the case. And that actually did turn out to be the case. I caught tide shift, and then I stayed up late to catch a second tide shift just to see how the boat responded, because I didn't want to swing into the shore. And sure enough, we maybe swung 20 feet out from the center of the channel, but we got nowhere near the shore. So we went to sleep that night and enjoyed nature. We got up early the next morning and continued down the Waccamaw River. The Waccamaw River seems like a hotbed of activity for fishermen, and I'm not much of a fisher person myself, but I guess it probably makes sense. The deep water and then the trees right up to the shoreline and in the water along the shoreline probably is a pretty darn good habitat for fish. And it seemed like there were boat ramps about every 10 miles, and the car parks were just full of cars, and there were just fishing boats all up and down there zipping by us, so it looked like a pretty good place for fishing. The Waccamaw River is approximately 140 miles long in southeastern North Carolina and eastern South Carolina. It drains an approximate 1,110 square miles in the coastal plain along the eastern border between the two states into the Atlantic Ocean. Navigable as far as Conway, the lower river has been an important commercial route for the region since the 18th century. Before that, it was equally important for various Native American cultures. In the 19th century, planters developed an extensive rice cultivation on lands of the lower Waccamaw River. They depended upon the labor of thousands of enslaved Africans and their descendants to cultivate and process this labor-intensive crop. After the American Civil War, some of the large plantations were confiscated by the federal government. In addition, the emancipation of enslaved persons as new laws established a free labor market. Some planters established sharecropping or tenant farmers to gain workers, but as freed men wanted to control some of their work. The rice industry declined under these conditions. And it is interesting, the Intracoastal Waterway does actually go through some abandoned, I guess, derelict, unused rice fields, and they actually have very small signs right by them that say they're no longer functioning rice fields, which is interesting. It's a part of history, a lot of times we read these things and we feel disconnected from it. At least I do. It seems like such a foreign slavery and all of that. I know that was the history of our country. It seems like such a distant thing, especially coming from a small town in Wisconsin. It just seems so alien. But when you actually pass some of that stuff and see it, it just, I don't know, kind of brings it home. And I'm sure as we head further south, we'll probably see a lot more remnants of that kind of thing. And yeah, it's a little sobering. As the Waccamaw River worked its way back to the Atlantic Ocean, the cypress trees gave way to coastal wetlands that we had seen extensively in North Carolina, and I'm led to believe we will see all the way through Georgia and North Florida. As we made our way back toward the coast, we anchored for the evening in South Santee River, just off of the Atlantic Ocean. The next morning, we got up and departed before sunrise in an attempt to make it to Charleston, South Carolina before nightfall. And just as the cypress forest had given way to the coastal wetlands, the fishermen gave way to duck hunters. And it must have been duck season, because or was it wabbit season? Or duck season? Or wabbit season? I think you have to be a certain age to get that joke. But it must have been duck season, because there were a lot of duck hunters out very early in the morning, and I hope we didn't disturb them too much coming through. And that's all for this week. I would like to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I absolutely would not make these videos. As a matter of fact, there's going to be a chunk missing coming up because I actually had decided to stop making these videos and then was kind of talked out of it. So anyway, without the Patreon support, I absolutely wouldn't make these. You guys are keeping me going, and your support means the world to me, so thank you so much. And my Patreon crew is Joan and Judy Judnick, Edwin Sauter, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Joan and Jim Linbow, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, and Matthew Spott. Thank you guys so very much. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below that'll take you to our Patreon page, and there you get access to a bunch of behind-the-scenes information, photos, posts, extra videos. And I try and post a little something every day with an update of where I am, what's going on, that kind of stuff, to keep you in the loop and current. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That helps us out as well. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.